Hey folks, welcome to Bear Mountain. Today we've got a pile of biochar here that we created when we burned a lot of the blackberries out of the kitchen rebuild project. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to show you how we prep it and prepare it and use it in the garden. So stay tuned and follow us as we do it. Okay, biochar, what is it? It's kind of a fancy term, but basically what it is, it's material that's been burned in an absence of oxygen or a low oxygen environment, and it creates charcoal. It's not the same charcoal you use in your hibachi, or that's dating me I guess, but in your barbecue, because those typically have additives in them to help them burn hotter and just basically cook food. This material here is in a state that when you grind it up, it acts as an excellent soil amendment for holding on to minerals like phosphorus and provides a home in its many air spaces for microorganisms, as well as it'll help the soil retain water. What we're going to do is we're going to grind this material up, and then we're going to prepare it to put into our asparagus bed, because we're ready to put the next level of compost on the asparagus. Now the thing about biochar is once you get a piece, it looks very much like the original piece it came from. But the thing about it is you can basically break it up into smaller and smaller pieces. What's left are the structures, all the moisture, all the other things that went into making this are gone, and the cellulose and the other structures of the plant material basically have been oxidized and burned. So what we do is we'll grind this material up very simply using our hands. You can just crush it. It's almost like a graham cracker. The material, we wetted it down before we do it to kind of keep the dust down, because one of the things that can happen with this is it can get kind of dusty. But we were able, with about 5 yards of blackberry waste, to get a whopping about probably 5-6 cubic feet of biochar. And so we'll just take a pile of it like that, and then we put it into our wheelbarrow. We just grind it up with our hands. And then what happens, once we have a wheelbarrow, pretty much we have enough here to get started with our asparagus patch. You can continue to kind of break it up a little more with your hands. You want to try to get it into the finest you can. Remove any kind of like impurities, like rocks or pieces of metal or something. Anything that doesn't make sense. If you got a few pieces that aren't completely burned, that's okay. It's not a big deal. So what we're trying to do is get it down to as close to almost a very coarse powder as we can, because as we increase the surface area, that increases the effectiveness of the biochar. So this looks pretty ground up. Okay, we've ground it up pretty good for us. I mean, it's not a machine grade grind to it, but it's pretty fine. Just a couple of notes about biochar. There's a variety of different ways of making it. This one is just was a function of a very hot fire in the open, and we were able to feed it continuously enough with enough waste that we were able to get a good layer of charcoal built up while the fire was burning very hot. We didn't break any of the pieces down or cut anything up. We just kept feeding the fire and kept making sure everything was moving towards a center pile. And the idea was keeping that pile, as we kept building it up, we were cutting off the oxygen to the lower layers. So what would happen is these lower layers then would turn into charcoal. Once we got it built up, actually ran out of fuel, the last thing we did is we came and wetted it down. We thoroughly put the fire out. And the idea behind that is if you don't, these pieces, even though they were buried underneath ash on top of them, would just continue to burn. And ultimately, after a number of hours, you would come out and there would be nothing but a gray pile of ash. So the idea is we wanted to get it going hot, get the bulk of material oxidized out of this and turned into biochar itself before it would burn on to the last step, which would be turning it into white ash. And then thoroughly wetted it down, turned the pile a little bit as best we can to make sure we had moisture all the way through, and that quenched any further burning. And after a couple of days of sitting, being wet, it's still damp, and that's why you're not seeing much dust. It's in perfect shape to be used. So you don't need to cut the pieces up into little pieces or anything like that. The key to it is get enough mass and a hot enough fire over the top of it that you're cutting off the oxygen. There are other ways. People make these fancy kiln type burners. They're called retorts, and those actually are pretty professional. And if you were into making a lot of biochar, that's probably the way to go. In this case, this was a very informal way of getting something good out of the blackberries that had been tormenting us for so long.
Which are very bad.
Yeah, they're very bad. Well, now they're going to do something good. So our next step is we want to basically charge the biochar, okay? Because if you just put it on blank, it'll still work, but it will end up actually locking up some nutrients. And what we want to do is put enough nutrients mixed with this that it'll work without causing any problems to soil fertility to the plants. This is going to be put on as a top dressing to our asparagus bed, and ultimately this is probably about 2 cubic feet, and it will be what will be spread on top of our row, which is about 3 foot wide and about 25 foot long. So let's go over there and get that started. Okay, why do we charge biochar? As I talked about earlier, one of the things it can do when it's in its raw form, it can act as an inhibitor to, locking up minerals and things that so strongly they may not be available to the plants. So what we want to do is, in circumstances, if you're going to be applying this on a bed that you were going to go plant annuals into, or like veggies of salad and stuff like that, you'd actually, after you put the components in to charge the biochar, you'd want it to sit for probably at least minimum 2 weeks, but probably longer than that. A couple of months would be good. And that way, any microorganisms that are introduced into it have a chance to colonize things, and the material will continue to stabilize out. But what we're going to be doing today is applying it as a top dress. Then we're going to be putting another inch or so of compost over the top of that on our asparagus bed. So eventually what's going to happen is the microbiology will continue to work on this, and over time the watering effect from rain and etc., and besides the earthworms and etc., will begin to pull these individual components deeper into the soil itself. So we're not too worried about minerals in the root zone of the asparagus getting locked up, but what we're looking at is this is going to build fertility as we go into the future. It's going to help retain water, it's going to help make more minerals like phosphorus and etc. available. So what we do when we charge is, there's all kinds of recipes for it. The basics of it is, I want to introduce biology by using worm castings. And we're going to make this is approximately about 2 cubic feet. Each one of these scoops is, I don't know, probably about 4 cups. And so I'm going to put in about 4 scoops of the material, worm castings. Now, if you don't have worm castings, you can use well-aged compost. That would do the same thing. Then we're going to apply some minerals. This is Calphos. and I'm going to be applying about 2 scoops of that.
Always when the wind comes
Always
up.
when the wind blows, that's the best time to use powdered materials. And then the last thing that we're going to put in is if you have access to rock dust. This is rock dust, it's basalt rock dust. It's actually out of Canada, but we're in the Pacific Northwest, and a lot of our soils in the Pacific Northwest, the basis of them is basalt rock. Since we're a kind of a volcanic area in our origins, this will have many micronutrients in it, and we'll put about 4 scoops of that in. Okay, now comes the fun part. Now we just kind of mix it up. Now I'm doing this in a small tub. If you're doing a much bigger amount, you could easily use a cement mixer or something of that nature. But I'm just making a small amount. Now the interesting thing is, as I'm doing this, I can start to feel the moisture start to come out of the biochar into the actual rock dust itself. And the calphos, these powdered things, are beginning to pull some of that moisture out of the biochar itself. So the whole moisture, the whole mixture is starting to feel like not completely wet, but you can definitely feel that the moisture. And if you notice, there's no more dust flying in the air. So, okay, so we got it all mixed up, and took a little long to do this by hand, about 5-10 minutes, but we just wanted to make sure it was thoroughly mixed. Most of the pieces of biochar have been crunched up pretty good, and what you'll notice is we now have a nice deep gray material that is ready for application. Now what we're going to do is we're going to top dress the asparagus bed, and so since we're going to be putting after this about another 1 to 2 inches of compost over the top, what we'll do is we'll put this on fairly thick. And just to give you an example, I'm going to do scientifically by hand. And the idea is we want to make certain that this material is fairly equally spread and gets a nice light coating over the entire top. Now the advantage of doing this is that over time, if we're able to do this again, say next year, if blackberries can make another nice addition to our property someplace else, we'll turn that into biochar too, and keep, adding more into the various beds in the kitchen garden. Because what we're trying to do is really build up moisture retention capacity, as well as continually giving a home for the microbiome and to hold minerals. And this will help, biochar will help hold on to things like phosphorus and things of that nature, so that they can be more available to the plants. So let's get this spread out, and then the last thing we'll do is put the compost over the top and then wet this guy down. These guys are looking pretty good for about 3 or 4 weeks. Let's do it. Okay, we've got the biochar rock dust amendment down, put it on pretty heavy, and the next step is we're going to apply our own compost. This is a compost we made from our own waste here on the farm, and it's been aged about 9 months, so it's in pretty good shape. And we're going to put this down, give it about 1 inch or 2 over the top. We'll get the whole bed coated. And then as the last step, we'll water it in real well. Okay, so we got the compost put on about 1 to 2 inches deep. This is probably going to be the last time till fall. We'll probably put a layer of compost about 1 inch over it once these guys going through dormancy. And the biochar is safely tucked underneath. Everything is wetted in. We're all done here with this job. And I think there's one thing though that we emphasize here. This is our own compost. It's not been sifted, so you might, you know, if you look in the pictures, you're going to see sticks and maybe some old nut shells and things of that nature. But all this stuff rots down over time. We'll do a video later on about how we make compost and what the various types of uses that we use compost with on the farm and in the garden here. The next thing is going to be setting up the irrigation in here, and that's a topic for another video a little bit later. But we're getting close to starting to plant some veggies, so we have to start thinking about how we're going to get them watered, so that's next. Well, if you have any comments or questions, be sure to leave them down below. If you're not subscribed to us, please subscribe. We're always looking for new ideas too. So thanks for watching today, and I hope you have a good day. Bye.